In Chapter 6, we're going to talk about a number of policing topics, including issues in policing, using police discretion, problems in policing, the use of force in policing, and finally, criminal procedure in policing. So we have a number of topics to cover in Chapter 6. Let's start with who are the police, right? Who makes up the police? 50 years ago, it was primarily white men with high school educations, with generations each entering the force. So it'd be like my grandfather is a police officer, my father's a police officer, so I'm going to be a police officer. That's primarily the makeup 50 years ago. And over time, we've seen more college educated individuals as well as women and minorities joining the police forces, and people of varying ethnicities. And this resulted in bringing a more diverse makeup to police departments and units, which also brought a more balanced force that is more representative of the communities that they serve, these individuals serve. Demographic makeup, still fairly small, 13% are female. More than 11% are members of racial minority groups. When there is more diversity within the police tend to improve their overall policing functions. And minorities and women, they bring special skills and capabilities to the force. We're going to dive into that a little bit more. I'm just kind of doing a little overview. Minority police officers. The first African American officer came on the scene in 1861. The first African American officers obviously experienced prejudice. They were limited in what they were able to do. They couldn't get promoted, patrolling only in minority neighborhoods. Today, though, more well integrated in departments. However, they are still facing some racial discrepancies. We will discuss that in a little further. But overall, they still have the same problems, cultural and discretionary, and some of the other policing problems and job stress related issues related to policing as white officers. Same thing goes for women in policing. First female police officer was in 1910, the Los Angeles Police Department. They experienced discrimination, separate selection requirements. They had to do menial tasks. They weren't even patrolling. They were paper pushing. Today, same struggles as minorities, struggling to be accepted. And also, they face more disciplinary action and higher levels of job stress. Let's talk about some educational requirements. Should there be a requirement for college education for police officers? Should they be required? Most agencies do not require a college degree. About a third of departments require at least some college. Should there be a specific study? Should it be a specific area of study like criminal justice? Should there be some other general studies kind of program rolled in? What would be the benefits of a college education for police officers? Communication skills, that's a big one, right? Being able to write and articulate better. Police officers do a lot of writing. They take a lot of witness statements. They have to write these things down. They have to write their own accounts. They have to keep police reports. What they do and what they put into writing gets used in court. Learning and knowing how to write and articulate and communicate are excellent skills for a police officer. Also allows them to understand the system better and become more efficient at their job. So while college degree is not required for all I think we can make an argument that it is certainly beneficial for an individual who wants to be in law enforcement to have a college education. And as we talked about with regards to types of jobs after Chapter 4, you have probably seen in the assignment we did for the database that a lot of positions require it. FBI, Secret Service, the higher up you go, the more. Some of jobs inside the Secret Service require people to have even a law degree or a master's degree. So education for police officers, good thing. Let's talk about the culture, the police culture. All professions have unique characteristics that distinguish them from others, right? Policing isn't different. It's a brotherhood. You may have heard that term before. They have each other's back. They stick up for one another. They don't turn each other in, even if someone is engaging in something that is unethical or illegal. The concept is they're the only ones that understand each other. They understand it. Where do these beliefs come from? Or what are some specific beliefs? What are some of those core beliefs? What do you think? That police are the only real crime fighters. That's a belief. No one else understands the real nature of police work. Loyalty to their colleagues and peers counts above all else, especially in a partner setting, right? Their partner. It's impossible to win the war on crime without bending the rules a little bit. And members of the public, here's a core belief, members of the public are basically unsupportive and unreasonably demanding upon them. And patrol work is unpleasant. Patrolling. This police culture developed, obviously, over time, developed in response to what? Think about police work. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous lifestyle, especially now. It's insulated, got their own bubble, so to speak. And having the support of each other, their colleagues, is very helpful and beneficial. Why? Even think of it outside in a different kind of profession. Think of it if you're on a sports team, you got your teammates, right? They support you. They're there for, emotional support. You can get things off your chest. Nobody else understands. They deal with fighting criminals and crime day in, day out, and it can be quite taxing. I'm not a police officer, was not a police officer, but as a criminal defense attorney, I had to deal with criminals, and it can be taxing day in and day out, except I don't get to talk about what they've said or they've done because I have an ethical obligation to keep things confidential. So when I want to discuss it with colleagues, I have to be extremely careful, but I digress. So it's a support system. It's a support system. The police personality. Think about it. You're related to a police officer, got a police officer in the family, a police officer. They tend to have a similar, not everyone, we're not going to put them all in the same position, but they all have a very learned over time personality, dogmatic. It's very authoritarian, suspicious. It comes with the job, years of exposure to danger or the need to use force or having to control very threatening situations. And then added to that, they're under a microscope. They were under a microscope before we get to the times we are in now with constantly being filmed, and they can be because they are members of the government. And so when they're in, and we have, the right to free speech. So whenever they are in public, they can be subject to being filmed. And that nowadays has increased their level of, their personality. They're under a microscope, so they become more cynical. Styles. There's various styles of policing. They each develop their own. distinct style when they conduct themselves. Sometimes it comes along with the agency or the management above what's being directed, but a lot of them develop their own. And there's 4 basic types of police styles. You have the crime fighter, you have the social agent, the law enforcer, and the watchman. So the crime fighter, sounds like Batman. The crime fighter investigates serious crimes. Their job, their role is to investigate serious crimes and catch criminals. They will focus on the victim, and they have this thin blue line of protecting society from murderers and rapists. And all those non-serious crimes, those property crimes, those little types of misdemeanors, those traffic infractions, they have to be handled by other government agencies. We're too big for that. We're too busy fighting crime, getting the murderers and rapists off the streets. So that's the crime fighter. We have the social agent. And this is our community problem solvers. They are involved in a wide range of activities. Their job is to protect their community and solve the problems within. They're the troubleshooters. They want to repair the social fabric. They want to have the connection between the community and law enforcement and work together. Our social agent, seeking to repair the social. I like how the book uses the term fabric, putting us together. And then you have the law enforcer, or the legalistic approach, legalistic approach, and they operate by the book. These folks operate by the book. Duty is to set and work by the law. We are enforcing all laws. We detect, we identify, we apprehend, and we bring them to court. The law enforcer. No discretion. We're going to talk about discretion. But we do things by the book here, the law enforcer. And then you have the watchman. They maintain public order. They ignore the minor infractions and only act when the social or political order is jeopardized. Their attitude is kids will be kids. They kind of take a more passive approach. And as long as nobody is endangering anyone, we're just going to keep watch. We're going to be the watchman. And which I'll pose the question, which one fits best in society now? Which one do you think? Do they all kind of play a role? Should a police officer have a little bit of each one of these? Because over time, one style will typically dominate. A police officer will fit into one of those, or one group of agents if it's coming down from a management directive, how to police. What do you think? Think about that one. We might have that question in a forum post. I will leave this question here. What are the differences among the police officer as a crime fighter, law enforcement, and social agent? Which role do you think is most effective? Building an effective relationship within a community. I'm going to drop this right here, but you're going to probably see that in this week's forum post. Discretion. This is a critical aspect. This plays a big role in policing today. The critical aspect of their job is their own personal discretion. They get to decide who to arrest, who to put in jail, when to use deadly force, when can they conduct a stop and frisk. We talked a little earlier about the stop and search. And they get to decide whether charges are going to be brought initially. I say initially because it's the prosecutor that ultimately decides what will go to court. But it has to start somewhere, and it starts with police discretion on what to charge, who to arrest, who to put in jail, when to use deadly force. So what is discretion? It's a personal decision, right? It's a personal decision in making a choice. They get to choose the carrying out. This is the first part of the criminal justice system, law enforcement, the cops, before we even get to the courts and corrections. So, and they're not regulated. They're not regulated in their daily procedure that means certainly they have management that oversees them, but in handling their daily procedures and duties, there isn't this scrutiny, and nor is their discretion subject to judicial court review most of the time, unless we're dealing with a constitutional issue, which we're going to talk about in procedure. But for the most part, the things like, when am I going to make an arrest? I'm not going to arrest you. I'm going to let you go today. That doesn't get reviewed. That's in their discretion. And only recently has this concept of emotional intelligence made its way into police training programs. And so what is it? What is emotional intelligence? The ability to monitor one's own feelings and action and use that information in order to guide action. So keeping emotions in check. Let's talk about it that way. This is what emotional intelligence is. Keeping emotions in check, keep from reacting, keep anger out of the decision making. And there are a number of factors that influence officers' discretion. So let's talk about what they are. Legal factors. Severity of the offense. Right? The more serious, the more likely they're going to arrest. The more serious the crime is, the more likely a weapon is involved, and also involved in the arrest, versus something like a noise violation, right? You're playing your radio too loud, there's a big party at the house, the police might come over, knock on the door and say, hey, you need to keep it down, the neighbors are complaining, versus handing a violation ticket. You're stopped speeding on the highway, going 75 and a 65, they may just say, slow it down and let you go. If you're going 100 in a 65, more than likely you can get a ticket. So how serious is the crime? Are you committing armed robbery? Or are you being disorderly, or engaging in public urination in the community? So that's one area where discretion comes in. The legal factors, what are we dealing with? The environmental factors. What's the officer's living and working environment? What does the community culture dictate? Or is it more lax and progressive, or is it conservative and no nonsense? Specific training in an area as a result of community organization. Sometimes they take more action in those areas. For example, specific training. Law enforcement can be trained specifically. They do their basic police training, but then there are specific areas that they can go afterwards or continue in educational areas like domestic violence and how to handle domestic violence cases. There they might take a more approach on arresting those types of cases. There could be more organizations in the area for domestic violence, such as more women's shelters or more partner abuse arrests happening if there's more organizations that are, making a big deal about it. A lot of organizations make a big deal about DWI, so there might be a lot more DWI arrests. So what are the environmental factors? That plays a role in their discretion. Department factors. How a department operates shapes the police practices. Usually the department heads are mandating certain types of mandating arrests for certain types of crimes and warnings in other areas. High crime areas, there might be more focused on arrests than warnings, despite what the crime is. They might even arrest for small time things in a high crime area just to show that they are enforcing and policing that particular area. And then in other areas, you might get off with a warning. I think I've used the example of possession of marijuana prior to its becoming legal in New York, small amounts of it, possession of small amounts of it. It didn't matter if you were in New York City and you possessed it, you weren't going to get arrested. If you did in Plattsburgh, you were going to get arrested. It's the environmental factors, the area expectations, disorderly conduct, the same thing. You might get one warning here to disperse, and if you don't, you're going to get arrested. Disorderly conduct in Manhattan, I think, would be an extremely hard thing to police. Peer factors, peer influence. A fellow officer might seek advice from another officer. A more senior officer, how should I proceed? What would you do? What's normal amongst, our group? You might seek peer factors in determining whether or not you're going to make an arrest. The situational factors, meaning they're reviewing the offender. What's the demeanor of that person? How are they manifesting their personality? Are they challenging the police officer? Are they giving back talk? Are they being obnoxious and rude? Are they being dangerous in their conduct? That's more likely to get an arrest than somebody who's not behaving that way. Oh, I'm sorry, officer. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't, I'll stop. That sort of thing. How crime or situation is encountered plays a role. If it's a police call and an officer is dispatched somewhere, there's more likely to be an arrest. Why? Because somebody's calling, so there's going to be some sort of record of that call, and someone's going to question, was there an arrest made or not? And if not, why wasn't it? So, you already have somebody who's calling in, a 911 call, which means there's something going on. And if it involves an actual victim and a call, there's more likely going to be an arrest. So there is a paper trail, because the 911 calls are kept, and there's a recording, or there's a recording, but there's a record of it. And if nothing comes of it, there has to be an prepared explanation why, not just it was all good. Need to actually document it. But if a officer happens upon some sort of situation, they see two people kind of messing around, or looks like they're going to get into a altercation, an officer can break it up, send them home, and not make any sort of arrests. And this happened a lot. I'm going to probably digress here. This happened a lot years ago with domestic violence. The police would be called, usually by a neighbor, check in on a house, and they would diffuse it. And despite usually the woman being physically, or you could visually see them abused, the police wouldn't make arrests. They just break it up, say, oh, it's okay here, officer. It's all good. And then, of course, she wouldn't want to press any charges for the fear of retaliation. Hence, that's why we had a lot of domestic violence laws and changes in DV cases and those types of laws that I've explained a little earlier, with regards to like stalking and strangulation, and the advancements in the reform in the rape laws. All right. See, I knew I'd digress a little bit there. So, extra legal factors. Does race, gender, class, sobriety, meaning whether somebody's drunk or not, do these, other things like the neighborhood taken into account, the relationship between the victim and the offender? I just kind of alluded to that. These all play a role, and the question is, should they play a role? And the research is mixed, taking into account the offender's characteristics versus the victim's characteristics. That plays a role. If you have a 6-year-old victim and a 40-year-old offender, yeah, there's a high risk of arrest there for the offender. If you have an 80-year-old victim, and a 40-year-old offender, arrest is more likely. So the older and younger the victim, more likely that there would be an arrest. Intoxication, yes, that plays a role, whether or not somebody is intoxicated, especially with a DWI, driving while intoxicated, versus, let's say, public urination. Somebody's drunk and police come up across somebody, urinating in public and they're intoxicated. It might send them on their way, versus somebody who gets behind a wheel. Race playing a role. We've already discussed the stopping and questioning and frisking concept. The racial profiling. My question to you, do police practice racial profiling? I think we discussed that last chapter in some detail. I'll let you revisit that if you need to. But would you like to live in a society that just abolished police discretion and just used a full enforcement policy? What if it's just anything you encounter or make an arrest? Is that better than use your discretion? Or do we need police discretion? This is merely your opinion with regards to this. I mean, police discretion isn't going to go away. Certainly, the particular agencies can set forth the policy on cases or crimes they wish to enforce, gun control, domestic violence, things of that nature. But overall, in policing, should they have discretion? I will leave that for you to consider. Our next topic is going to be problems, the problems of policing.